Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Depends on where you're joining us from. Welcome to today's webinar. We will talk about ERP and when paying too little can cost you too much. And with me this morning, I have Wally and Renee, who will be running the presentation today. So Wally, why don't you kick it off and introduce yourself?
Good morning. My name is Wally Merkus. I'm the cloud practice leader here at Witham. I've been in and around cloud and technology for the past 20 years. My areas really are dealing with both cloud and on-premise solutions. I tend to focus a lot on strategy and organizational readiness. I'm excited about delivering a really interesting message today, and I'll hand it over to Renee to introduce himself.
Yes, my name is Renee Teberge. I have been a cloud advocate before the cloud was even called a cloud. In the old days of the application service provider, and then it switched to on-demand is when I first got involved in the cloud. I started my IT career as a software analyst and developer, and created a web-based intranet in the early 2000s. I was also part of the Gmail beta test way back in 2004. The areas of expertise is really the business applications like CRM, ERP, human capital management, process mapping, requirements gathering, and vendor evaluation. It's great to be able to join today to talk about ERP. And before we go on too far through our agenda, we're going to determine what is meant by ERP, especially in the context of small and medium business. It's quite important to define what the terms are so that there's consistency in our understanding and in our communication. We'll also be taking a look at the expected costs of modernizing your ERP, how much an ERP actually costs, and we'll explore what makes up the cost of acquiring a business system. And we're basically going to look also at some of the money that is currently being spent not on ERP. In closing the webinar, we are going to share the expected benefits of what a company should expect when they are transforming into a new ERP. So our premise is pretty simple. Our premise is that many organizations are already expending a lot of resources, time and money, that should be going into an ERP system. It's just that the money is not going there. People, process, and technology are three key areas that companies spend their resources on, and all three need to be considered when designing a transformation. When we consider the data from studies and from our own experience, we conclude that most organizations spend enough resources, money specifically, to deploy a full-blown ERP. However, that money is spent on inefficient and not scalable manual processes instead. So typically, as organizations grow, they tend to create processes that exist outside their software system. After all, the #1 used financial tracker in the world remains Excel. So as a result, the business processes tend to be built by default rather than by design. This is due to the inability of their current system to perform the tasks they need. So for example, if and when orders get lost or orders get mishandled, there's a lot of errors in shipping. And people will create processes to tie the orders to make sure it doesn't happen again. So for example, a sales team will want to do a proper handoff to the next stage. That process could be anything. It could be sending an email to a particular inbox or a particular person. It could be placing hard copies on a tray. It could be calling someone to let them know, or whatever it is. Regardless of that process, most organizations that do not use an ERP have countless processes like that, and all these processes live outside the system. And unless they're performed perfectly, orders are going to fall through the cracks and will always remain manual processes because of the shortcoming of the software. So our goal today is really to demonstrate that you can take those dollars that you spend in manual operations and invest them to streamline workflows, optimize the people and the process elements to ensure that you get the most of your technology, drive revenue in an efficient and cost-effective way. We worked with a customer a number of years ago. It was a small electrical contractor. He was challenged to track inventory. And during our first assessment, it was clear that there were many manual processes in place to to track the sales and the inventory consumed to complete the work. The company was using a smaller package for accounting and sales and many spreadsheets to manage the inventory. This example was easy to quantify, as we simply had to tie the sales with the inventory and implement a concept of project inside their new ERP. This led to their ability to trace the inventory and tie the order and inventory together. Their ERP revealed a P&L by project and also showed inventory traceability. So this totally increased the optics into the inventory movement. At first, it was resisted by the electricians, but then when the savings were quantifiable, everybody was held accountable to the inventory of their own trucks, and they eventually accepted, and things went well. So I suspect that a lot of the weekend jobs that they were doing required them to buy their own electrical supplies rather than sneak some from their own trucks. So we're going to align the language of our business systems. An ERP really is a blanket term for enterprise resource management. While there's many definitions of ERP, we like a simple one. It is the ERP is a software that runs your business. Now, an ERP is more than just accounting. It's definitely all about accounting and typically provides a single source of truth for your data. But with only accounting tracking, optimization processes, and being efficient and having the right information at the right time in the right format, it's very much of a manual and laborious process. So if we only focus on debits and credits, the organization will be challenged to meet its full potential now. Today's webinar is mostly about outgrowing your current systems, but it's intended to have tools to make a more informed decision. Accounting is mostly focused on the debits and credits, paying your staff, vendors, making sure the customers pay their bill, whereas an ERP is foundational. It's transformational. It revolves around the entire organization. To truly excel at operational efficiencies, organizations need to take a step further from their accounting package and move to the full functionalities of an ERP. Wally is going to walk us through some of the functionalities of the ERP.
Thanks, Renee. ERP is on the next slide is reflecting the needs of an organization. You know, for example, if you're a retail organization, you'll likely need a system to manage your sales, you know, inventory, point of sales, e-commerce, etc. If you're an e-tailer, you might take that in a different direction and really focus more on the e-commerce platform. You know, driving your business towards meeting your customers' expectations and a purpose of omni-channel. You know, if you're manufacturing, you might need to manage your inventory from your raw goods. You might need to think through the entire manufacturing process, production planning, BOM management, while keeping a very keen eye on your supply chain. Wholesale distributors will focus on supply chain and optimizing the throughput of inventory from warehouse to customer, including warehouse management and logistics. Professional services, well, they need time and billing and project management at a minimum. A full services resource planning tool or engine will truly help that professional services organization be transformational. As you can see, every industry will need to manage internal processes as well as communicate efficiently with all stakeholders. You know, customers, prospects, partners, vendors, legal, etc. All the people we communicate with on a day-to-day basis. A fully integrated CRM goes a long way to streamlining these communications, and standardizing productivity tool sets will help you be more efficient, track your data, and make access a breeze. The key here is a single source of truth across your entire platform. So Will Smith becomes Will Smith in your CRM and your ERP and all the way through any other stakeholder system that you might have. Managing employees in the full life cycle from recruiting to retirement has different levels of sophistication as well. Managing this process on spreadsheets is a real challenge and can impact your overall culture for certain. These processes can change the game to attract and retain the right talent. And as we move into the next series of accounting, To be truly effective, an ERP should have a component to track both entities and their activities. If we think for a moment, customers, vendors, partners, contacts, and how we interact with each of these through, say, quotes or opportunities or sales orders, purchase orders, support cases, all while keeping track of phone calls, emails, meetings, etc. These are challenging to make sure that we're all on the same page as a company with communicating with any of those stakeholders. These systems also can provide access to reports like pipeline and sales forecast to track the efficacy of the sales engine. One of the most popular systems that companies add is the customer relationship management, which is what I'm referring to above, or a CRM. With an integrated CRM, organizations can have a single and complete view of all transactions for each customer, partner, vendor, etc. Imagine going to a single place and being able to see all of the communications, all of the transactions, and all of the information I have on that particular entity. Integrated CRM allows companies to effectively manage the sales cycle, provides workflows through the process. So when I come in the morning, I'm not just looking at an empty screen, I'm actually looking at a workflow on the sales process. For those of us that have been around sales a long time, we know that it's not just a gut feel, it's actually a process. And by having a workflow that allows me to drive through that process with minimal effort is truly transformational. With the CRM, you can use the sales forecast as inputs into your inventory demand planning. So if I have a sales forecast or I'm running a big marketing event and I'm expecting a huge uptake in the demand, I can actually factor that into my demand planning so that my inventory will meet my expected demand when the time comes. The service industries can also leverage these tool sets by making their resources available. So if you are closing a big project and we're working through the sales cycle and we know that project is going to hit in 2 months, we don't want to wait till a week before we start scheduling and planning our resources to be able to meet the need of that. Okay, moving on to the supply chain. Managing the supply chain is important for any organization that moves widgets to optimize operations. You must maximize speed and you must maximize your efficiency. Work at improving these areas of the business will help to improve your customer services, right product, right time, or just in time for those of you that use that kind of technology and methodology to meet your customers' expectations. Reducing the overall operating costs by becoming smart purchasers, decreasing purchase or production costs, or avoiding delays because you don't have the stock, etc., improve your financial position, and they help you manage cash flow and more appropriately and predictably. A good tool in this area will help you manage beyond your stock levels. This is managing the full life cycle, the full procurement life cycle, that is, and movement through your organization. Moving on to the warehouse. Moving on to the warehouse. Another component is the ERP and the warehouse management. This tracks inventory movement, item location, stock levels, item receipts, and it really does manage the throughput and fulfillment of pick, pack, and ship. It helps you optimize your stock levels, fulfillment ratios, streamlines the efficiency of the movement and tracking of your inventory on your balance sheet. This is a critical piece and often an area that I find is overlooked when I'm in working with clients. The entire process from receipt of goods into stock through to the logistics management can be optimized in a good, what I'll refer to as a WMS, but warehouse management system. The demands in this area continue to increase and more companies are demanding this to be part of their overall ERP platform. As I said, when I'm consulting in this area, it behooves me that companies spend so much money on their asset inventory, yet are not necessarily tracking to the level of detail that they need through the warehouse management. Having a good WMS integrated into the CRM allows a sales rep to ensure inventory is present, so it helps you manage your customer expectations. And the sales rep can do this before confirming a sale, confirming a delivery date. Sales reps can tell the customer when stocks are supposed to be in, and therefore manage that customer's expectations seamlessly. Integrated WMS increases the fulfillment rates, speed, and reduces back orders. And most importantly of all of that, helps you manage your customer expectations. Inventory replenishment can be done automatically whenever minimum thresholds are reached. POs can be issued directly in most of the newer systems. So if you have 100 widgets in inventory and your minimum level is 75, once a customer decides to buy 30 of them, the stock level drops below the minimum and a purchase order is automatically generated. This is a rudimentary process called min-max. There are more sophisticated algorithms that can go into the tool sets, but this is a really good example of how you might be able to manage your inventory. Tracking outgoing stocks, PO, and incoming stocks is all done within one system. One of the largest expenses in most businesses are from human capital. Think attraction of new talent all the way through to retiring our employees. So we recruit them, we retain them, and we retire them. Our employees all come at a cost. There are rules in place with a global economy that leads to localization challenges to all of our workforces. As we start to hire folks all over the world, it's not just about being in state anymore. So localization has truly gone global. Most times when we look at our customer systems, we see adapted versions of tools, usually Excel, being used in various stages of the company's growth cycle, pre-revenue to small business or even higher. At some point, the realization that you need to standardize your HR function becomes critical. And that's usually, hopefully before you have your first lawsuit against you, but usually you're trying to standardize and find out, be more efficient with your employee contracts, be more efficient with communicating with your employees and onboarding them, and be more efficient with having your employees drive communication through the proper channels. Many tools today offer some form of functionality to manage parts of or all of the human capital needs. It's very important to consider what functionality is right for you and what you want to accomplish. A fully integrated HR system provides many of these benefits to your finances and are generally the main inputs for financial planning and analysis. We mention HR systems here as part of it, but remember that there are true systems in the HR space. We mention it here truly from an FP&A or financial planning and analysis subset. Excellent, next slide. The global economy continues to drive e-commerce platforms. Many ERPs will help manage the e-commerce function. Whether B2C or business to consumer or B2B, business to business, the ability for customers to get self-service or so-called touchless order is very important and reduces the barrier to increase revenue potential and reduce your operating costs. The ability to scale and add new products or product lines to a greater audience are for some the main benefits. This world brings many nuances into the systems environment, with governance, PCI compliance being one area that requires some sophistication from your ERP. As demand to buy online, think Amazon, Alibaba, and others, increases in the future, companies will need to ensure their e-commerce platform is built in or fully integrated to the ERP to ensure customer satisfaction and order fulfillment is seamless throughout the life cycle. Customers want omni-channel or seamless shopping experience, whether online or from a mobile device, by telephone or in bricks and mortar, buy when they want, buy what they want, return when they want, exchange when they want, in store or online, and they always want it available. Does that sound familiar? You really do need to figure this piece out if you're in this space. Production comes in many forms. As we start to think about manufacturing a little bit inside of ERPs, many companies do a light form, kitting or light assembly, to full-blown manufacturing. The first two can typically be managed fairly well in most of the ERPs designed with this feature set. For full-blown manufacturing, it is likely important to consider tools that are specifically made for the industry. Think discrete, BOMs versus process, continuous like recipes. So discrete is more the BOM side, process and continuous is more of a recipe. The use of outsourced manufacturing is also very prevalent in North America, and the ability to outsource parts or all of a BOM need a system to be able to manage that overall process. There are some key functionalities in the areas to consider here. MRP, or materials resource planning, can optimize the entire supply chain and ensure you have the right amount of raw goods to produce the right amount of your product. It also brings in algorithms like seasonal demand, brings in algorithms to manage marketing campaigns and increase demand on your product should that be required. As you migrate away from ERP, tools that manage the product lifecycle management, or product lifecycle, PLM is so referred, are key and typically allow design type functionality in your process. Engineers love these tools because it allows them to take AutoCAD from design to order in a very streamlined fashion, and connects to the ERP so that we're still tracking all of the necessary costs, etc. Think engineering change orders when we get here. The engineering change orders, so if I swap out a part in the PLM, there's a disposition of that change order or a recall. I need to know how to deal with that. Those are the ways the PLM interacts with the manufacturing tool. So what is intelligence? BI is very interesting to everyone as we start to embark on a world where we want more data and we want the data at our fingertips and it just should be there. Our expectation as consumers of the data is very high. This really is the lifeblood of your system, of your companies rather, and it is the critical information necessary to make more informed decisions. We want it in real time. We want no delays. We want it consolidated when it needs to be consolidated, and it should follow all the GAAP compliant rules that an accounting system would follow. We should be able to report on information differently for our banks versus our board versus management folks, so that they can make their operational decisions and become more efficient throughout the life cycle of the organization. Dashboards have become, as you can see in the slide, have become the norm. Pulling in information from external and bringing it all into the ERP so that we can have our morning cup of coffee and understand what's going on in our business with an image and picture. Interesting, most of the newer modern ERPs also have click down or click through technology, which allows us to click on a picture. It's not just a fancy picture, and get to the detail behind all of these pictures. You can access these central dashboards with any of your key performance indicators with metrics that are important to grow your business. Use a concept called manage by exception so that you're really looking at the red flags and not the standard numbers. Modern ERPs will track the many, if not all, of the business function we described above as we move through and go through and ultimately meet our ERP and business systems goals. A fully integrated suite means many things to many people. It is important to understand there are different levels of integration. The key to remember here is to keep business processes necessary to drive your business in your industry. When a suite is completely integrated in all aspects, each step in the business process is simply a source document for a transaction, and adding a bit more info is all that is required to change the status. Here's a simple example. Mary calls to order 50 widgets. Mary's already in the CRM, so there is no need to create a new contact for Mary. Jack, the sales rep, checks the stocks on hand and proceeds to create a quote. Jack uses a preferred customer price list dropdown to add a discount. The quote is created and automatically emailed to Mary. Mary signs the quote and returns it to Jack, who with one click changes the quote to an order. Immediately in real time, the to-do list of the warehouse staff has one more item on it. The next time they look at this, it will be shipped. They automatically notice that it's in the appropriate location for fulfillment. If the sales rep decides he wants to make it urgent or get it out sooner or delay, all of these techniques can be used. The warehouse staff goes through and fulfills it, sends it to the customer, Mary's happy, and everybody moves along as we get the overall satisfaction of the customer. Simultaneously, if the stock level dropped below our required amount, our minimum, automatically a PO would go out to that particular vendor and order more stock should that be required. At all times, a sales rep is able to know the status of the order and where it goes next. When a customer calls, with a few clicks, the rep can tell the customer where exactly that order is and the anticipated receipt date. So this is all really interesting as we move on to the next slide. We've talked through a lot of functionality. Renee is going to talk about the overall investment of an ERP. Renee, over to you.
Thank you. It sure is a lot of features, and I'm sure that some of the participants are thinking, so what's the investment that's involved in that? Typically, the cost is going to vary according to the size of your organization. Using a standard segmentation for business size, this table shows that the average expectation for cost of the ERP, that's based on the latest studies, is reflected by a metric that we use that is called percentage of revenue. Most studies typically use that metric because it is the most useful one when the time comes to procure the ERP. There's some other metrics that are important, like total cost of ownership and the return on investment, the ROI. But when it comes to the procurement, we like to use the studies, all of the studies that we consult use the percentage of revenue. Businesses that are less than 15 million in revenue annually typically spend 1 to 2% of their revenue on the deployment. And the reason for that is typically they have access to some of the smaller, less expensive packages that are on the market. The businesses between 15 and 150 million dollars in revenue, they tend to spend more. They tend to spend between 2 and 6% of their annual revenue on an ERP deployment. And that's mostly due to the fact that they're in a spot of being big enough so that stakeholders, owners are a little bit more removed from the deployment, and big enough to have a number of resources that are less vested in the process. For many people in that space, they basically have a job and their attachment to the organization is less. And finally, large enterprise spend about 2 or 3% of their annual revenues on ERP deployment, and they typically have more of the resources that they can spend. Now, when we talk about these metrics to managers and those who decide on ERP, we oftentimes receive a what kind of explanation. That sticker shock gets a number of managers to reconsider and step back from their project. The licenses, the cost of the ERP comes in two different ways. It will be licensing and professional services. In the case of a purchase scenario, or also known as a on-premise installation, you will also have the mandatory license maintenance to pay. That is anywhere between 17 and 25% of your total purchase. And sometimes there's upgrades, hardware upgrades to consider. In my very first deployment, we had to wait a month because the server just didn't have enough memory, and we just kept on upgrading it. So the norm is that 1 or 2% will be spent on professional services for each dollar of software. So if a license costs $1,000, then expect to spend about $1,000 on professional services, training, transitioning from one system to the other. Now that we have a bit of an idea of how much an ERP may cost, let's take a look at a life without an ERP. Remember the sticker shock of 2 to 6% of your annual revenue for an implementation, because that is going to be useful as we move forward. Now, organizations without an integrated ERP, without a suite, may think they're saving money, but the contrary is quite true. We're going to take a look at a typical organization using something similar to QuickBooks for their accounting, or some other software with some other software around it. And this company grosses about $20 million in sale. Now, this is a composite company that we basically gathered the data from various studies. We're going to use some industry averages for this scenario. In 2017, in December, the Bureau of Labor Statistics showed that a full-time employee, FTE, that earns $25 an hour, costs the organization $33.55 per hour, or $67,000 a year fully loaded. The Society for Human Resource Management shows that the average revenue per employee is somewhere around $168,000 a year. $143,000 a year for organization. This is how much revenue on average is generated by one employee. And finally, this is one of the important statistics that will be used for the rest of our scenario here, is that the American Productivity Quality Center, the APQC, shows that processing sale order costs on average 24.21 per order. So this is the cost of processing a sales order. Using the scenario, we're going to look at a few operations that are there, but only one of them actually has data in there, and that is the sales processing order. So our company actually makes about 80 transactions per week at a cost of about $24 per transaction. So it costs the organization approximately $100,000 a year not to use an ERP, as in to do the manual process, the manual sales process from beginning to end. Imagine when you start combining the cost of transferring the data to the other functions, like shipping, invoicing, receiving payment, or any of the other functions that Wally was talking about earlier. All of these manual and an important fact that is also not accounted for is errors. Errors in shipping, errors in clerical data entry, errors in shipping the wrong parts to the wrong people, having to process returns, and all of this. And so we are simply looking at the plain fact of processing a sales order that costs $100,000 a year. Let's move on to the next slide. So now we're looking at a company that grosses about $20 million a year, and they may be balking at investing in an ERP because the 2 to 6% metric is scaring them a little bit. They think the cost is prohibitive. But actually what they're doing by doing the process right now is they're using 1% of their revenue just to process sales order. And none of this is a scalable investment. None of this can be repeatable or used. It cannot be used for strategic growth. It is basically a cost of doing business that cannot be recouped. And each of the processes that require a manual transfer from one system to another adds to the current cost of the organization. When an ERP is used, there are many benefits that will take place. There are many changes that will happen. There will be a reduction in manual processes because any transaction that contains all of the basic information and simply changes status along the way, just like Wally was talking about the example earlier when Mary went from quote to sales order to shipping just by a few clicks. All of these manual inputs and errors are omitted. There's fewer transcription errors, fewer orders that are lost. We also have a single view of the lead to cash process, single view of the procure to pay process. Just as the wheel is indicating it, we go from one process to the other quite seamlessly just by moving information from one end to the other. Our premise essentially was that you're spending money. You're just not spending it in the right place. You spend it on labor, and it is not a scalable investment. But here's what we want you to do. We don't want you to just take our word for it. Some of you are managers in your organization, and here's a bit of a small homework for you. It's going to actually enlighten you. We'd like you to invest 2 hours this week to investigate your own process time from sales order to process sales order. Check all of the processes from your sales team to whenever the order is shipped out the door, and add up the manual time that it takes. And then you can take a look at how many of those orders you process a week, and you will be very quickly able to ascertain how much money is being spent on manual labor in order to get your product or your service out the door. And once that's done, get in touch with us. We are able to guide you toward the best software for your business. Sasha?
All right. Well, thank you, Wally and Renee. We just have a few minutes to take some questions. Let me see what we have here. Okay. So the first question I'll pick is, from a light manufacturer of kitchen supplies, and they're looking to get an ERP, and they're wondering what functionality do you think is critical for this type of company, and when is the best time to change or adopt a new ERP?
Renee, maybe I'll grab that one. Critical functionality is really tough without understanding the full extent of your business and where you are at in your growth cycle. So it's going to be a tougher question to answer. But that said, we obviously debits and credits are foundational. The next key is your supply chain and managing the procurement of your raw goods. And lastly, you look at your operational process and workflows throughout the system and automate these as much as you can. Competing priorities in your organization are always a challenge. They'll also have an impact on your timing and maybe how you lay out the project, whether it's multi-phase or however you do that. That's going to be the challenge. We usually recommend a narrower scope for the first phase to remediate and modernize your accounting, and then expand to the rest of your business. So again, keeping with my thought process that I mentioned, which is debits and credits first, getting that reporting done. Start with reducing your time to close the books, improve your operational processes and workflows. Focus on your customer satisfaction and order processing and throughput. Thank you.
Okay, great. Let me take one more question, and then if anybody has any other questions, we're more than happy to address them by email, and we'll touch on how to contact us in just a second. This question looks like it's coming from an environment consultancy. They're a service company, and their field technicians are on the road. And I guess, what is the best ERP for a service company for someone like them?
Wally, I'll tackle this one. We just don't throw names of software at people who are looking for ERP. There's plenty of them that are out there, but what we like to do is we like to match what you need with what is there. Most organizations will use about 20% of the full-blown functionalities of the ERP. So all of these bells and whistles that are being sold oftentimes are just not being used. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that your requirements, that your business needs are going to be met. And so what we like to do is we like to spend a bit of time with you guys, guiding you in the process of defining the requirements and defining what is the vision of your organization. And once we have that, then we're able to walk through the selection process of what matches, what software matches those requirements. Back to you, Sasha.
Okay, great. That was a really good answer. Thank you, Renee. And that was a great segue into maybe some next steps that you guys want to take. If you'd like to learn more about ERP solutions and what makes sense for your organization, like Wally said, we won't throw names at you. We really want to start with a good process. So we're offering complimentary consultation to kind of evaluate where you are and help you get started. Once we send you a copy of the deck, you'll be able to click on the URL there at digital.witham.com/contact. And also feel free to check out our blog, digital.witham.com/blog, where we have some great additional ERP resources. And for those people whose questions we did not get to today, we apologize. We will answer them by email. So with that, thank you, Renee and Wally, and we'll talk to you later.